You feel it in the mornings now, don't you? That particular kind of waking where your eyes open, but something deeper stays asleep. You reach for your phone before your feet touch the floor, and the first thing you see is a grid of tasks that could belong to anyone. Send the email, finish the report, update the spreadsheet, attend the meeting where 7 people discuss something that could have been a paragraph. Your hands move through these motions with practiced efficiency, and yet somewhere beneath your ribs, there's a question you can't quite form into words. It sounds something like, what would happen if I simply didn't show up? And the answer that frightens you most is, probably nothing that couldn't be solved by Tuesday. This isn't laziness speaking. You know that. You've tried the productivity systems, the morning routines, and the apps that promise to make you feel accomplished. You've color-coded your calendar and batch-processed your tasks, and learned to communicate in bullet points because nobody has time for paragraphs anymore. You're efficient, you're responsive, you're meeting your targets. And yet there's this persistent feeling, like a stone in your shoe that you can't quite shake out, that none of it actually matters. Not in the way mattering is supposed to feel, not in the way that makes you certain, bone deep, that your presence in the world is more than just a slot that could be filled by someone else with the same login credentials. You've tried talking about this feeling, haven't you? But it's hard to explain without sounding ungrateful or dramatic. You have work after all. You have purpose, technically. You have things that need doing. But when you try to describe this specific emptiness, this sense of being a replaceable cog in a machine that doesn't seem to be building toward anything in particular, people look at you with that mixture of concern and incomprehension. They suggest therapy or vacation or vitamin D. They remind you that everyone feels this way sometimes, which is probably true, but doesn't actually help. Because the question isn't whether you're uniquely broken. The question is whether this feeling might be pointing towards something real, something that's missing not from your brain chemistry, but from the actual structure of how we live now. Think about your work for a moment. Really think about it. Can you see the whole of it? Can you trace the line from what your hands do on any given Tuesday to something finished, something whole, on something that exists in the world as a completed thing? Or is your work more like a fragment of a fragment, a small piece of a process that feeds into another process that eventually contributes to a quarterly goal that supports an annual strategy that aligns with a corporate vision that, if you're honest, you stopped reading after the 3rd bullet point? There's nothing wrong with you for losing the thread. The thread is genuinely lost. It's not designed to be visible from where you're sitting. You complete your tasks and they disappear into the cloud, into the database, into the next person's queue. You do your part, and it vanishes into a collaborative document where 12 other people have also done their part. And nobody, not even your manager, could tell you exactly how all these parts fit together or what the finished thing actually looks like. You've become very good at producing outputs, but you've lost any sense of making things. And there's a difference between those two activities that matters more than we usually admit. Making something means you can point to it, means you can say, this exists because my hands were in the world. Output just means the system processed you correctly. Output means you did what the algorithm expected. And maybe this is why, late at night when you can't sleep, you sometimes find yourself watching videos of people doing things with their hands. The carpenter fitting joints, the potter centering clay, the baker shaping dough. You tell yourself you're watching because it's satisfying, because there's something soothing about seeing a task completed from beginning to end. But maybe what you're really watching is proof that it's possible to do work where the connection between effort and result isn't hidden behind 7 layers of abstraction and project management software. You've noticed something else too, haven't you? How much of your work is about making sure other people know you're working? The status updates, the progress reports, the messages sent at carefully chosen times to demonstrate responsiveness. The performance of productivity, which sometimes takes more energy than actual productivity. You've learned to document your contributions, to make your work visible, because if you don't, it might as well not exist. And there's something exhausting about this constant translation of effort into proof of effort, this need to narrate your own usefulness, as if the work itself isn't enough evidence that you were there. In the quiet moments, you wonder what it would feel like to do work that didn't need to be explained. Work where your presence was self-evident because things literally wouldn't get done without you. Not because you're uniquely talented, but because you're the one who's there, who knows the task, whose hands fit the tool. You wonder what it would feel like to finish a day and see, with your actual eyes, the thing that's different because you were in the world today. The field that's now harvested, the wall that's now built, the meal that's now ready. Something that doesn't need a status report, because anyone can walk by and see it. But that's not how work is organized anymore, is it? Now, we have efficiency. We have optimization. We have systems designed to make sure that no single person is ever truly essential. Because essential means vulnerable, means the operation stops if that person is sick, or quits, or simply doesn't show up. So we've engineered essentialness out of work. We've made ourselves replaceable on purpose, because that's what makes the system resilient. And we've succeeded brilliantly, except nobody mentioned that making yourself replaceable might have a cost that doesn't show up on the balance sheet. Nobody mentioned that being genuinely unnecessary might do something to your soul that no amount of employee engagement surveys can quite address. You've tried to fill this gap in other ways. The hobbies, the side projects, the sourdough starter you maintained with more attention than some people give their children. Where you've tried to create little zones of essentialness in your personal life. Places where your specific presence matters, where cause and effect are clear and immediate. And maybe these things help. Maybe they do. But there's also something quietly sad about having to create artificial conditions for feeling needed, like building a greenhouse for a plant that used to grow wild. Sometimes you catch yourself romanticizing the past in ways that embarrass you. You see a photograph of farm workers bringing in the harvest, their faces tired but somehow complete, and you feel a pang of something you can't quite name. Envy doesn't capture it exactly, because you don't actually want to harvest wheat by hand in the August sun. You're not stupid. You know that work was brutal. And you know those people would trade places with you in a heartbeat if they could see your air-conditioned office and your ergonomic chair and your health insurance. But still, there's something in those photographs that speaks to a part of you that your current life never quite reaches. Something about the way those people look connected to what they're doing, like they haven't disappeared into abstraction, like they're still here, still material, still necessary in a way that can't be automated or outsourced or reassigned. And maybe this is why you're still awake right now, why you're listening to these words instead of sleeping. Because somewhere in you, there's a question that won't quiet down. A question about whether the thing you're missing is real or just a story you're telling yourself. A question about whether humans are actually meant to live like this, disconnected from the results of our labor, performing work that could be anyone's work, producing fragments that disappear into systems we don't understand and can't see whole. A question about what we've lost in the trade for what we've gained, and whether anyone actually sat down and decided this was a good bargain, or if we just sort of drifted here, one optimization at a time, until we woke up in a world where everyone is efficient and nobody is essential. So let's sit with this question for a while. Let's not rush to answers or solutions or reframings. Let's just acknowledge that the feeling is real, that it points to something, that maybe your restlessness isn't a personal failing, but a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. And then, when you're ready, let's go back. Not to romanticize or escape, but to understand what was actually different. To see what your ancestors had that you don't, and what they didn't have that you do, and maybe, in the seeing, to find some kind of peace with the trade we've made. Because the past wasn't better, not in most of the ways that matter. But it was different. And the difference matters more than we usually admit. Go back far enough, and you find your people in a field. Not your specific people necessarily, but the people whose lives shaped the template for how human bodies learned to feel about work, about purpose, about the specific way that belonging happens when everyone is genuinely needed. These weren't your ancestors in the genealogical sense, probably, but they were your ancestors in the way that matters here. Was in the sense that the shape of their days carved grooves in the human nervous system that your nervous system still expects to find. Picture it if you can. Not with the soft, focused nostalgia of a pastoral painting, but with the specific texture of real work on a real morning. The sun coming up over the wheat field in late July. The air already thick with heat that promises to become something punishing by midday. Your body wakes not to an alarm, but to light and to the knowledge, lodged somewhere deeper than thought, that the wheat is ready and the weather is clear. And these two facts together mean there's no choice about what happens next. The harvest doesn't wait. The grain won't pause its ripening because you're tired or uncertain or wondering about your purpose. It's ready now, and now is the only time that matters. You can feel this in your body even now, can't you? This sense memory that isn't quite memory, more like a groove worn into the collective human experience. The way your ancestors' bodies knew what needed doing without anyone having to explain it or break it into subtasks or send a calendar invitation. They could read the work directly from the world. The wheat was tall and golden, and the heads were heavy and nodding, and this was the entire job description, the complete assignment written in a language that required no translation. And so they went to the field, all of them. This is important to understand. The harvest wasn't one person's job or one family's responsibility. It was everyone's task because it was everyone's survival. The children who were old enough to walk were old enough to glean, and following behind the reapers to gather what fell, their small hands learning the feel of grain, learning the rhythm of useful work. The elders who could no longer swing a scythe could bind sheaves or watch the youngest children or prepare the midday meal. The pregnant woman who couldn't bend could still rake. The man with the bad knee could still stack. Everyone had hands, and everyone's hands were needed, not as an inspirational metaphor, but as a practical fact. You were awakened by your father's hand on your shoulder before dawn, the calluses on his palm catching slightly on your shirt. You didn't need to ask what day it was or what needed doing. You'd been watching the wheat, same as everyone else, had seen the colour deepen and the heads droop. And you knew, same way you knew when a storm was coming or when the cow was about to calve. Some kinds of knowledge don't come from being told. They come from being there, from watching the same fields through the same seasons until the patterns write themselves into your bones. Your sister was already up. You could hear her in the kitchen section of the one-room house, could smell the porridge warming, the bread from yesterday being sliced. Your mother was packing the midday meal into baskets, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone who has done this task so many times that thinking would only slow her down. Your younger brother was being difficult, rubbing his eyes and complaining, and your father's voice was gentle but immovable. The wheat won't wait, boy. Come on now. And so you all went to the field as the sky was shifting from black to deep blue to that particular pale gold that promises heat. And you went to the field and you were met there by the other families, the ones who worked the adjoining strips, the ones whose survival was braided with yours not through choice or affection necessarily, but through simple geography and necessity. Old Marcus with his 3 sons, the widow Chen and her daughters, the Kowalski family with more children than anyone could keep straight. Everyone was there because everyone had to be there. And in that universality of necessity, there was something that feels, from this distance, almost like grace. The work began without announcement or ceremony. The men with scythes took their positions in the line, spacing themselves with the practiced judgment of people who'd done this enough times to know exactly how much room each reaper needed. The scythe was a personal tool, fitted to the individual body. The handle worn smooth in the specific places where that person's hands gripped. Your father's scythe knew his height, his arm length, the particular rhythm of his swing. It wouldn't work quite right for anyone else. This is worth noting. In a time before interchangeable parts, The tools themselves became extensions of specific bodies, which meant the work could only be done by those specific people. Watch your father as he begins. The way he sets his feet, the way his whole body coils and then releases, the scythe blade singing through the wheat with a sound like silk tearing, the way he moves forward and then sideways, stepping into the space he's just cleared, then swinging again. It's not fast exactly, but it's relentless. A rhythm he could maintain for hours because the rhythm is sustainable. Mom, because his body learned this motion from his father, who learned it from his father. Because this is a skill refined over so many generations that it's become almost an instinct. You're behind him with a wooden rake, pulling the cut wheat into piles neat enough for binding. This is skilled work too, though nobody calls it that. You have to judge how much wheat makes a good sheaf, enough to bind securely, but not so much that it won't dry properly. You have to work fast enough to keep up with the reaper, but not so fast that you're sloppy. You have to read the field, avoid the places where the wheat fell wrong or grew too thick. Adjust your rhythm to match his rhythm. You're maybe 12 years old, and you're doing work that matters, real work. Work that must be done right because your family will eat this wheat or they won't eat, and depending on how well you do your job right now. Behind you, your mother and the other women are binding the sheaves with practiced hands, their fingers moving so fast you can barely track the motion. They're talking while they work, not about the work, but about other things, about whose daughter is marrying whom, about the Kowalski baby who has croup, about whether the rain will hold off until the wheat is in. Their conversation is punctuated by the rhythm of their hands, words fitting into the spaces between one motion and the next. They've learned to do two things at once, because there's always more than one thing that needs doing, because attention is a resource that can't be wasted on tasks the hands already know. Your sister is gleaning with the other girls and the younger children, and crawling through the stubble to gather every fallen head of wheat. Her apron is already full, and the sun isn't even high yet. She's singing something, a song you all know, and the other children pick it up, and for a while the field is filled with this high, clear sound that makes the work feel less like work and more like something else, something you don't have a word for, but that sits in your chest, like warmth. And here's what you need to understand, what's easy to miss if you're thinking about this from your modern vantage point. None of this is optional. Nobody is here because they're passionate about harvesting wheat or because they're self-actualizing through agrarian labor. They're here because the wheat is ready, and if they don't harvest it, they starve. Simple as that. The necessity is absolute. And yet, and this is the complicated part, within that absolute necessity, there's a kind of freedom that your modern life, with all its actual freedom, somehow lacks. You know exactly why you're here. You know exactly what will happen if you do this work well and what will happen if you don't. You know where you fit in the line, what your hands are meant to do, how your effort connects to the effort of everyone around you, and how all of that together adds up to something whole and finished and necessary. There's no ambiguity. There's no wondering if your work matters or if someone else could do it just as well. You can see the wheat standing and you can see it falling and you can see it being gathered and bound and stacked, and you are part of that transformation. Your hands are literally in it. And at the end of the day, you will be able to point to the section of field that you harvested and say, I did that. We did that. It's done. The sun climbs higher and the heat becomes something solid, something you move through like water. Sweat runs down your back and makes your shirt stick to your skin. Your hands are cramping around the rake handle and you've got blisters forming, but you can't stop to tend them because the line keeps moving, because your father's scythe keeps swinging, because the work doesn't care about your comfort, and everyone knows this and accepts it as simply the truth of things. Someone passes a water jug down the line and you drink without stopping your work, the water warm and tasting slightly of clay. And it's the best thing you've ever tasted because your body is screaming for it. And you pass the jug to the person behind you without looking, knowing they'll be there, knowing they need it too. This is what interdependence actually looks like, not as an abstract concept, but as a warm jug of water passed from hand to hand down a line of people who are all doing the same hard thing together. Mid-morning, someone starts a work song, one of the old ones with a rhythm that matches the scythe swing, and one by one, everyone picks it up until the whole field is singing. You don't think about joining in, you just do, your voice finding its place in the collective sound without any conscious decision. The song doesn't make the work easier exactly, but it makes it bearable, gives the suffering a shape, transforms it from random misery into something that's being done together, on purpose, with a kind of defiant joy. This is something we've lost almost entirely, isn't it? The idea that hard things can be born together in a way that makes them not just survivable, but almost beautiful. We've optimized for individual comfort, for personal convenience, for the elimination of all unnecessary difficulty. And we've gained a lot in that trade. But we've also lost this particular kind of resilience, this way of facing brutal necessity with your people beside you, and finding in the sharing of the burden something that feels almost like celebration. Midday arrives and the work stops. Not because anyone's watching the clock, but because the sun is directly overhead, and working through the worst heat is foolish when you can rest and return when it's slightly less brutal. Everyone moves to the shade at the field's edge, to the spot where the women have laid out the meal. It's simple food, bread and cheese and onions, maybe some smoked meat if the winter stores are holding. But you've never been hungrier in your life, never more ready to eat, and the food tastes better than anything you can remember because your body has earned it, because the hunger is real, and the food is the answer to that hunger, direct and uncomplicated. People are scattered in the shade, eating and resting and talking in the slow, comfortable way of people who've worked hard together and will work hard together again in a few hours. Old Marcus is telling a story about a harvest when he was young, when his father's scythe blade broke midday and they had to send someone running to the next village to borrow another. The Kowalski children are playing some kind of game in the shade, their high voices carrying across the field. Your mother is nursing the baby, her eyes half closed, her body taking this rare moment of stillness. You're lying on your back, looking up through the leaves at the sky. Your body aching in that particular way that means you've used it for real work. And you're thinking about nothing in particular. Your mind empty in a way that feels good, clean, like a room that's been swept. You're aware of your sister beside you, of your father a few yards away talking to Marcus, of the sound of other people's voices and laughter, and the baby's contented noises. You're aware of being one part of a whole thing, of fitting into something larger than yourself in a way that requires no explanation or justification. Nobody here is wondering if they matter. Nobody's having an identity crisis or questioning their purpose or feeling like a replaceable cog. Not because they're simpler or less thoughtful than you are now, but because the question itself doesn't have room to form. Your purpose is self-evident. You matter because the wheat needs harvesting and you have hands. It's not profound or inspiring or self-actualizing. It's just true. And there's a kind of peace in that truth that all your modern freedom can't quite touch. The afternoon work is harder than the morning because you're already tired and the heat is worse. Your blisters have opened and your hands are bleeding slightly, and every swing of the rake sends a spike of pain up your arms. But everyone around you is hurting too. You can see it in the way they move, in the set of their shoulders. And there's something oddly comforting in that shared suffering. You're not alone in your pain. You're all in it together, and you'll all come out the other side together. And the wheat will be harvested because it has to be. Because this is what has to happen for life to continue. Late afternoon, maybe an hour before sunset, your father cuts the last section of wheat. There's no fanfare, no celebration, just the quiet satisfaction of a task completed. The last sheaves are bound and stacked with the others. Someone does a quick count, estimating the yield, nodding with cautious approval. It's a good harvest, better than last year, enough to see you through the winter with some to sell or trade. Your father claps you on the shoulder, his hand heavy with exhaustion and something else, something like pride. You did good work, he says. And you know it's true because you were there, your hands were in it, you can see the evidence stacked in rows across the field. The walk home happens in near silence, everyone too tired to talk. But it's a good tired, an earned tired, the kind that comes with the certainty that the day wasn't wasted, that something necessary was accomplished. Your body hurts in ways you'll feel for days, but underneath the pain is something solid, something you can't quite name, but that feels like the opposite of the free-floating anxiety that haunts your modern nights. Evening meal is quiet, everyone eating with the focused attention of people who've burned thousands of calories and need to replace them. Then bed and sleep comes fast and complete. No lying awake wondering what it all means. And no scrolling through your phone to distract yourself from existential questions. You're asleep before you finish the thought, and you sleep the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who has nothing to prove because they already proved it, whose worth was demonstrated by their actual presence in the world, whose hands transformed standing grain into gathered sheaves that will become flour, that will become bread, that will keep your family alive through the winter. This was not an easy life. Let's be absolutely clear about that. This was a life of relentless physical labor, of chronic pain, of hands that hurt and backs that ached and bodies that wore out decades before their time. This was a life where one bad harvest meant starvation, where one injury could mean ruin, where the margin for error was essentially zero. Your ancestors weren't happy in any simple sense. They were tired and worried and often sick, and they died younger than you will, and they would have chosen your air-conditioned comfort in a heartbeat if they'd been offered the choice. But they had something you don't have. They had the bone-deep certainty of being essential. They had work that made sense, that connected directly to survival, that could be seen and touched and completed. They had a place in a system of interdependence where everyone's effort mattered, because everyone's effort was literally necessary. They had the experience, rare in your modern life, of doing hard things with their people and coming through to the other side. And maybe this is what your restless nights are mourning. Not the past itself, not the brutality or the poverty or the early death, but the clarity, the essentialness, the unambiguous knowledge that you were needed, that your hands fit somewhere in the work of keeping life going, that you weren't just producing outputs for a system you don't understand, but actually making the things that people needed to survive. You can't go back to that world. You know this. The past isn't a place you can return to, and if you could, you wouldn't want to stay there. But maybe you can understand what you lost in the bargain for what you gained. Maybe you can name the thing that's missing without trying to recover it, without pretending that your modern restlessness is something that can be fixed by buying the right things or optimizing your routine or finding your passion. Maybe the ache you feel isn't a problem to be solved, but a kind of grief to be acknowledged. Grief for a way of being human that's mostly gone now, that traded essentialness for comfort, interdependence for independence, clarity for complexity. It wasn't a bad trade, not exactly. But it was a trade, and pretending we didn't lose anything in the exchange doesn't make the loss less real. So let yourself feel it. The longing for work that makes sense, for a place that's truly yours, for hands that know exactly where they fit. Let yourself acknowledge that your ancestors had something you're missing, even as you wouldn't trade places with them, even as you're grateful for antibiotics and central heating and the fact that a bad harvest won't kill you. You're allowed to miss what you never had. You're allowed to grieve for a kind of belonging that's mostly vanished from the world. And you're allowed to acknowledge that no amount of employee engagement surveys or mission statements or purpose-driven brands will quite fill the space left by the loss of genuine material essentialness. Because here's the truth they don't tell you. You're not essential anymore. Not in the way your ancestors were essential. The system is designed to work without you. Your job could be someone else's job. Your effort disappears into processes you can't see whole. And this isn't your fault, and it isn't a personal failing, and there's no individual solution, because it's not an individual problem. It's a structural reality of how we've organized work in the modern world, a trade we made collectively for benefits that are real but came with costs we're only beginning to understand. And maybe understanding this, really understanding it, and doesn't fix the restlessness, but makes it more bearable. Because at least now, you know you're not crazy. The thing you're missing is real. It was there, and now it's mostly gone. And your longing for it isn't nostalgia, or weakness, or a failure to adapt. It's a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation, a human heart reaching for a kind of meaning that evolution prepared you to find in interdependent labor and clear material purpose. You can't go back, but you can understand what was lost. And in the understanding, maybe, find some kind of peace. The seasons turned for your ancestors in ways you barely notice now. Winter meant one kind of work, spring another, summer a third, fall a fourth. The wheat harvest was just one beat in a rhythm that encompassed the whole year, the whole life. After the grain was stored came the threshing, the winnowing, the grinding. After that came the long winter of maintenance and repair, of making tools and mending things and preparing for spring. Then ploughing, planting, tending, then harvest again. The cycle was so reliable it barely needed names. You knew where you were in time by what work needed doing. This created a different relationship to time itself, didn't it? Not time as an abstract grid to be filled with appointments, but time as a living thing, a rhythm you were part of rather than something you managed. You didn't control the seasons or the weather or the ripening of grain. You participated in it. You learned to read the signs and respond appropriately, to work with what was rather than trying to optimize it into something else. There was a kind of humility in this that we've mostly lost. Your ancestors knew they were small parts of systems much larger than themselves, systems that preceded them and would continue after them. They didn't expect to remake the world in their image or to bend nature to their will. They expected to do their part, to fit their effort into the appropriate place, to pass along what they'd been given in roughly the same condition they received it, maybe slightly improved if they were fortunate and worked hard. This wasn't resignation or fatalism. It was realism. They understood limits. They understood that some things could be changed and some things couldn't, and that wisdom lay in knowing the difference. They understood that their place in the world was to be custodians of a small piece of it, to do the work that their particular hands could do, to contribute to the continuation of life without expecting to be exceptional or unique or world-changing. And maybe there's something in this understanding that you need right now. Not the limits themselves, because your life genuinely has more possibilities than your ancestors could have imagined. But the peace that comes from accepting that you don't have to be exceptional, that being ordinary is enough, that fitting your effort into the appropriate place is its own kind of success. Modern life tells you constantly that you should want more, be more, do more, that you should optimize and improve and disrupt and innovate, that settling for ordinary is a kind of failure, that if you're not reaching for something bigger, you're wasting your potential. And maybe this constant pressure to be more than you are is part of what's making you so tired. Your ancestors weren't reaching for anything. They were where they were, doing what needed doing, and that was enough. Their worth wasn't something they had to prove or earn or justify. It was inherent in their presence, in their willingness to do their part, in their hands fitting into the work that needed hands. They were needed simply because they existed, and because the work existed, and because the two came together in the obvious, uncomplicated way that work and workers used to meet. Think about your father's hands for a moment, scarred and calloused, and bent slightly from decades of gripping tools. Hands that knew the weight of a scythe, the resistance of wheat, the exact angle needed to cut clean without wasting energy. Hands that had been shaped by work the same way the scythe handle had been shaped by hands. A mutual wearing down that resulted in perfect fit. He never thought about his hands, probably. Never considered them as separate from himself or as instruments he was using. They were just part of how he was in the world, how he enacted his participation in the ongoing work of staying alive. When he taught you to use the scythe, he didn't explain the mechanics or break down the motion into steps. He just put the tool in your hands and showed you, his body demonstrating what words couldn't quite capture, and your body learned by mimicking his body. And this is how skill passed from one generation to the next for thousands of years. This kind of learning is almost gone now, isn't it? Now we learn from manuals and videos and online tutorials, from abstract instructions that try to convert bodily knowledge into language. And something is lost in that translation. The knowledge still transfers more or less, but the relationship changes. Learning from a screen is different from learning from your father's hands. One is information transfer, the other is something more like inheritance. Your ancestors learned almost everything that mattered from the people around them, from watching and imitating, and gradually being trusted with more responsibility. They learned to read the weather from the old men who'd spent 70 years watching skies. They learned to bake from mothers and grandmothers who'd made bread so many times they could feel in the dough when it was ready. They learned to build and plant and harvest and preserve from people who knew them, who cared whether they learned correctly, who had a stake in passing along the knowledge because the knowledge was what kept everyone alive. This created relationships that modern learning can't quite replicate. Your teacher wasn't some distant expert with credentials. Your teacher was your mother, your father, your aunt, your neighbour. Someone who knew you, who saw you every day, who had a vested interest in your competence because your competence contributed to collective survival. The knowledge came wrapped in relationship, and the relationship gave the knowledge meaning beyond mere functionality. When your father taught you to harvest wheat, he wasn't just teaching you a skill. He was bringing you into a tradition, a lineage, a way of being human that stretched back further than anyone could remember. He was giving you your place in the line, showing you where you fit in the ongoing work. And when you learned it, when your hands finally found the right rhythm and your body understood the motion, you weren't just acquiring a technique. You were becoming who you were supposed to become. You were joining something. We don't have this anymore, do we? We have education, which is different. We have training and certification and professional development. We have information available on demand about how to do almost anything. But we don't have this sense of being brought into a tradition by people who love us, of learning our place in an ongoing story, of receiving knowledge that's been worn smooth by generations of use. And maybe this is part of what makes modern work feel so lonely. Even when you're on a team, even when you're collaborating, there's a fundamental isolation in how you learned what you know and how you do what you do. You weren't taught by people who knew you. You taught yourself, mostly, from sources that have no relationship to you beyond the transaction of information. Your skills aren't inherited, they're acquired. And acquired skills, no matter how sophisticated, don't connect you to the past in the same way inherited skills do. Your ancestors worked in a web of relationships that was so tight, so inescapable, that they probably didn't even recognize it as something special. They knew everyone they worked with, not just their names, but their families, their histories, their quirks and capabilities. They knew that Marcus's eldest son was strong but slow, that the Chen daughter was quick but got distracted, that the Kowalski children worked best if you made it into a game. They knew this because they'd worked with these people their whole lives, because the same hands that helped with this harvest had helped with every harvest, because continuity was assumed. You don't have this kind of continuity, do you? Your co-workers are often strangers or near strangers, people you know only in their professional capacity. You work together on projects and then disperse to other projects with other people. The teams are always reforming, the org charts always being redrawn. There's no assumption of ongoing relationship, no expectation that the people you're working with today will be the people you're working with next year. Everyone is temporary, including you. This makes a certain kind of sense in a mobile, dynamic economy. But it also means you never quite settle into the ease that comes from working with people who know you deeply, who've seen you tired and sick and brilliant and stupid, who understand your rhythms and patterns without you having to explain them. You're always performing competence for people who don't know you well enough to see through the performance. You're always proving yourself, always on, because there's no accumulated trust to fall back on. Your ancestors didn't have to prove themselves after a certain point. Once you demonstrated competence at the wheat harvest, that was it. You were known as someone who could harvest wheat. The knowledge was collective and settled. You could show up the next year and just start working. No introductions needed, no establishing credibility, no wondering where you fit. You fit where you'd always fit, and everyone knew it, and you could save your energy for the work instead of spending it on workplace politics and impression management. There was a restfulness in this that's hard to explain if you haven't experienced it. The restfulness of being known, of having a place, of not having to justify your existence or explain your value. You were valuable because you were there and you had hands and the wheat needed harvesting. End of story. No resume required. But notice what made this possible. It wasn't just that your ancestors were better at community or more authentic or less individualistic than you are. It was that their survival was genuinely interdependent in ways yours isn't. They needed each other in the most material, immediate sense. If Marcus didn't help with your harvest, you might not get it in before the rain. And if you didn't get it in before the rain, you might starve. So Marcus helped, not because he was altruistic, but because he knew you'd help him in return. Because mutual aid wasn't a value or a choice, but a survival strategy. This created obligations that were absolute, but also, in a strange way, freeing. You didn't have to decide whether to help. You didn't have to weigh the costs and benefits or worry about being taken advantage of. You helped because that's what people did, because everyone helped everyone else, because that was the only way any of you survived. The social fabric was tight because it had to be, because looseness meant death. We've loosened that fabric intentionally and for good reasons. The tight social control that came with interdependence was often suffocating. Your ancestors couldn't easily leave their village or choose a different life, or escape from relationships that weren't working. They were bound to each other and to the land in ways that limited their freedom profoundly. And we've gained enormous liberty by weakening those bonds, by creating systems that let us survive independently, by making it possible to move and change and reinvent ourselves. But we've also lost the security that came with the bonds. We've lost the certainty of being needed, the unambiguous knowledge that our people would catch us if we fell because they had to, because their survival was tied to ours. We've traded bondage for freedom, and it was probably the right trade, but the freedom is colder than we expected. It turns out that being needed, even by necessity rather than choice, feels better than not being needed at all. And this is the paradox you're living with, isn't it? You have more freedom than any human in history. You can move anywhere, do anything, become anyone. You're not bound to the land or the family or the tradition. You're free. And yet that freedom sometimes feels like weightlessness, like floating untethered, like being so free you might just drift away entirely. Your ancestors were heavy with obligation, thick with relationship, bound by necessity. And the binding hurt sometimes, no question. But it also held them, kept them grounded, gave them a place they couldn't fall out of because the net was woven too tight. You don't have that net? You have options instead. And options are good, genuinely good. Not until the moment when you realize that having infinite options means having no necessary place, no spot that's indisputably yours, no role that only you can fill. The wheat harvest happened every year for thousands of years. The same motions, the same rhythm, the same songs probably, passed from one generation to the next with only small variations. And there was a kind of eternity in this repetition, a sense of participating in something that was larger and longer than any individual life. You were doing what your father did, and his father before him, and his father before him, back further than memory or record. You were one instance of a pattern that would continue after you, that your children would carry forward. That was bigger than all of you put together. And this gave individual lives a kind of meaning that didn't depend on personal achievement or unique contribution. You mattered because you were one repetition in an ongoing pattern. You were essential not because you were special, but because you were there, in your place, in your time, doing the thing that needed doing. The meaning came from participation in continuity, from being one link in a chain that stretched from the past into the future. We've mostly lost this source of meaning, haven't we? We've been taught that meaning comes from being unique, from making our mark, from doing something that's distinctively ours. We're supposed to find our passion, discover our purpose, create our personal brand. We're supposed to be original and innovative and different. And there's nothing wrong with any of that, exactly. But it's also exhausting in a way that being one repetition of an eternal pattern never was. Your ancestors didn't have to invent their meaning. It was given to them by the work that needed doing, by the place they occupied in the ongoing cycle of seasons and plantings and harvests. They didn't have to discover themselves, or find themselves, or create themselves. They just had to show up and do their part. And that was enough. And maybe part of what's making you so tired is this constant pressure to generate your own meaning, to justify your existence through achievement or creativity or impact. Maybe you're exhausted from trying to be significant when your ancestors only had to be present. Maybe you're worn out from the demand to be special when being ordinary used to be perfectly fine. Let yourself rest from that demand for a moment. Let yourself imagine what it would feel like to just be one instance of a pattern, one repetition in a cycle, one person among many doing necessary work that's been done before and will be done again. Not special, just present. Not unique, just willing. Not innovative, just competent at the tasks that need doing. There's a peace in ordinariness that we've forgotten how to access. A peace in knowing your place and fitting into it without apology or ambition. A peace in being exactly who and what you are, one human among many. Your hands doing the work that hands have always done. Your life fitting into the pattern of lives that came before and will come after. Your ancestors had this peace, at least sometimes, in the moments between striving, in the rhythm of work that was so familiar it required no thought. They had the peace of being small parts of something large, of knowing their effort would be forgotten, but the pattern would continue, of accepting their own ordinariness as simply the truth of things. You can't fully recover this peace because the world that made it possible is gone. But you can stop fighting against your own ordinariness quite so hard. You can stop trying to prove that you're exceptional and just accept that being ordinary might be enough. You can recognize that your worth doesn't have to be earned through achievement, because worth isn't something you achieve. It's something you have by virtue of being here, being alive, having hands that can do work. The night is deep now, and you're getting tired, aren't you? The weight of the day is settling into your bones, and the words are starting to blur at the edges. And that's good. That's what's supposed to happen. You're not supposed to solve anything tonight or fix anything or even fully understand anything. You're just supposed to rest. So let the images fade a little. Let your ancestors go back to their work, their hands finding the rhythm, their voices joining the song. Let them be where they are, in their time, in their place, doing what needs doing. They don't need you to save them or envy them or romanticize them. They just need you to understand, a little, what they had and what you don't, so you can stop blaming yourself for missing something real. The field is harvested now. The wheat is stacked, and the sun is setting, and the workers are heading home, their bodies aching and satisfied, their day's work visible behind them in rows of golden sheaves. They'll sleep soon, the good sleep of people who've done what needed doing, whose hands fit exactly where they fit, whose place in the world is unambiguous and earned and enough. You can't join them there, but you can let their rest teach you something about your own. You can let their certainty illuminate your uncertainty without trying to recreate their world. You can acknowledge what you've lost without pretending you want to recover it. You can grieve the trade we made without rejecting its benefits. And in the acknowledging, in the grieving, maybe you can find a different kind of rest. Not the rest that comes from having all the answers or solving all the problems, but the rest that comes from understanding a little why you're so tired. Why modern life, for all its comforts and conveniences, sometimes feels like trying to sleep in a room where all the furniture is slightly the wrong size, and you can't quite get comfortable no matter how you arrange yourself. Your ancestors' furniture fit them perfectly because it was made for bodies doing that specific work, for lives organized around that specific rhythm. Your furniture doesn't fit as well because the shape of modern life doesn't match the shape your nervous system expects. It's not that you're broken or ungrateful or failing to adapt. It's that the mismatch is real, and pretending it isn't doesn't make it go away. So stop pretending for tonight. Let yourself feel the full weight of what's lost. Let yourself miss the harvest you never attended, the hands you never held, the place you never occupied in a line of reapers singing work songs in a field of wheat. Let yourself long for essentialness, even though you wouldn't trade your freedom for it. Let yourself be complicated about this, because it is complicated, because the trade was worth making, and the loss is still real, and both things can be true at the same time. Your ancestors would understand, I think. They weren't simple people living simple lives. They were people as complicated as you are, trying to make sense of their own world, carrying their own griefs and longings. They probably looked at the world that came before them and felt some version of what you're feeling now. This sense that something important had been lost, that the old ways had something the new ways couldn't quite replace. This longing for what came before isn't new. It's not a product of modern life or social media or capitalism. It's just a thing that humans do. While this looking backward, this feeling that meaning and belonging and purpose was somehow clearer in the time that came before. And maybe the longing is less about the actual past than about a need that the present isn't meeting, a need for essentialness and interdependence and work that makes sense that we haven't figured out how to satisfy in the world we've built. But we're learning slowly. We're starting to notice what we lost. We're starting to name the specific ways that modern life makes us lonely and restless and uncertain of our worth. We're starting to understand that efficiency and comfort and individual freedom, valuable as they are, don't fully satisfy the human need for belonging and purpose and essential participation. And maybe that understanding is the beginning of something, not a return to the past, because that's impossible and undesirable, but a recognition that we built a world optimized for certain values, and those values, important as they are, aren't the only ones that matter. That we might need to build differently going forward to create new forms of interdependence and belonging and essential work, forms that honor both our need for freedom and our need for connection. But that's a project for the daylight hours, for the times when you're awake and thinking clearly. Right now, in the deep night, your only job is to rest, to let the restlessness settle, to stop fighting the longing and just let it be what it is, a reasonable response to a real loss, a human heart reaching for a human thing that the modern world hasn't figured out how to provide. So breathe. Let your body settle into whatever surface is holding you. Let the tension in your shoulders release. Let your jaw unclench. Let the thoughts that have been circling start to drift apart like smoke. You don't have to solve anything right now. You don't have to fix anything or understand anything or be anything other than what you are, which is tired, which is enough, which is actually perfect for this particular moment. Imagine, if you can, that you're lying in a field at dusk after a long day's work. The wheat has been harvested and the tools have been cleaned and put away, and there's nothing left to do but rest. The ground is solid beneath you and the sky is darkening above you, and you can hear the quiet sounds of other people settling in around you. They're breathing evening out, their bodies finding stillness. You're part of something here. Not because you achieved anything or proved anything or made yourself indispensable. Just because you're here and everyone else is here and you all did the work together and now you're all resting together and that's the whole of it, complete and sufficient. Your hands are still, the tools they held are set aside. There's no reaching for anything, no grasping, no trying to prove or earn or justify. Just hands that did what hands do, attached to a body that did what bodies do, part of a day that unfolded the way days unfold when people work together at necessary tasks. And in this stillness, this not having to be anything other than what you are, there's something like peace. Not the absence of longing or the resolution of questions, but a kind of acceptance. An acknowledgement that you're human and humans need things that the modern world doesn't always provide, and that's sad, and it's okay to feel sad about it, and the sadness doesn't have to be solved. It just has to be felt and acknowledged and held gently while you rest. So rest now. Let the field and the workers and the harvested wheat fade into the background. Let your ancestors return to their time, and let yourself stay in yours. You can't join them, and you wouldn't want to, not really. But you can carry something from them into your own life. Some small understanding about what it means to fit your hands to necessary work, to be part of a pattern larger than yourself, to belong to something that belongs to you in return. Sleep is coming for you now, if you let it. You can feel it at the edges of your awareness, that soft blurring, that gentle dissolution of thought into something quieter. Don't fight it. Don't try to hold on to the ideas or the images or the understanding. They'll still be there tomorrow if you need them. Right now, you just need to let go. Let go of the longing. Let go of the restlessness. Let go of the question of whether you matter and whether your work is meaningful and whether you're doing enough or being enough or achieving enough. Let all of it drift away like wheat chaff on the wind, leaving just the simple fact of you here, now, breathing, alive, enough. The harvest is over. The work is done. The day has ended, and the night has come, and it's time, finally, to rest. Not because you've earned it, or deserved it, or completed everything that needs completing, but just because it's time, because that's how days work. Because even in the modern world, with all its complications and contradictions, bodies still get tired and night still falls, and rest is still what happens in between the working. So sink into the darkness. Let it hold you the way the earth held your ancestors after their long days in the field. Let yourself be small and ordinary and temporary and beautifully, perfectly insufficient. Let yourself be just one person among billions, one moment among countless moments, one breath among all the breaths that have ever been breathed and will be breathed, unremarkable and irreplaceable in exactly equal measure. The wheat grows whether you watch it or not. The seasons turn whether you understand them or not. The work continues whether you're there to do it or not. And in that continuation, that relentless unfolding of life, regardless of any individual's participation, there's something oddly comforting. You're not responsible for all of it. You don't have to be essential to the whole operation. You just have to show up for your small part, do what you can with the hands you have, and then rest when the day is done. And you've done that. Maybe not in the way your ancestors did, maybe not in ways that feel as clear or meaningful or essential, but you've done it. You showed up, you used your hands, you participated in the ongoing work of being alive. And that's enough. It really is. So, sleep now. Let the questions dissolve. Let the longing settle into something softer, something almost like acceptance. Let yourself drift into the dark space where there are no comparisons between past and present, and no measurements of worth or meaning or purpose. Just the simple animal fact of a body that worked and now needs rest, a mind that thought and now needs quiet, a heart that longed and now needs gentleness. The field is empty now. The workers have gone home. The wheat is stored and the tools are resting, and the world is settling into the particular stillness that comes after necessary work is done. You're settling too, whether you notice it or not. Your breathing is slower. Your thoughts are getting harder to hold. The boundary between being awake and being asleep is starting to blur. And that's exactly right. That's what's supposed to happen. Soon you'll cross that boundary without even noticing. You'll slip from being someone who's thinking about sleep into someone who's sleeping. And in the morning, you won't be able to pinpoint the exact moment when it happened. It will just have happened, the way things happen when you stop trying to control them and just let them be. So let it be. Let yourself be. Let the harvest rest, and the workers rest, and the wheat rest in its granary, and let yourself rest with them. One tired body among many, one small life among billions, unremarkable and precious, and exactly, perfectly enough. The night is here. The silence is here. Rest is here, waiting for you to finally accept it. So accept it. Rest now. You're done.